Hey guys, and welcome back to the Moms and Mysteries podcast. We are getting into part 2 of our Sherri Papini episode. If you missed part 1, go back and find it on the feed. It was posted today as well. And now we're just going to dive right into part 2 where we left off.
Here we go. So outside the hospital walls, media attention was exploding. When Sherri first went missing, Keith had taken to every media outlet he could get on. He wanted Sherri's face on every screen and wanted the whole world looking for her. But now it was really all too much. Paparazzi was following their car, reporters knocked on their front door, and the family really couldn't go anywhere without being photographed. A friend offered the Papinis a secluded log cabin in the mountains to get away from all of it, and they accepted the offer. The Papini family went dark for several months. They didn't leave the cabin, they didn't do interviews, and they hardly engaged with the outside world at all. To onlookers, it looked like the family was focused on healing. But behind the scenes, investigators were still digging into what happened and looking for answers. In the days following her return, Sherri sat for multiple interviews with police, but she would only talk to them with her husband in the room. On November 28th and 29th, she gave 2 interviews. In the first one, she was emotional and crying throughout much of it as she described what she remembered about the day she was taken. She struggled to recall timelines, locations, and details about the way certain events unfolded. But investigators reassured her that this was normal and that trauma could really do that. They asked her to try and picture the scenario from above as if she were watching it from a bird's eye view. And at that point, it seemed like her memories started to become more clear. Meanwhile, a local blogger named Tim Scarborough became one of the first vocal critics of Sherri's story. He pointed out how strange it was that her abduction took place in broad daylight on a street within sight of 5 different houses, yet nobody saw or heard a thing. Surveillance footage was found from the morning Sherri resurfaced that showed her running through a parking lot with her arms clearly swinging freely and completely unrestrained, but when officers found her, her arms were bound. These inconsistencies raised even more questions, and Tim Scarborough started to suspect that Sherri was lying. He also speculated that her husband Keith may have been involved or at least knew more than he was letting on.
And Keith was well aware of these rumors, and he just kind of tried to tune out all that extra noise. Keith gave the police full access to his phone and Sherri's, and after looking over both of them, he was cleared. But the biggest question of all was, who did the unknown male DNA found on Sherri's underwear belong to? And that question still wouldn't be answered for a little while longer. In the months after Sherri returned home, her life became defined by fear. She slept with all the lights on, and she was triggered by loud noises, unfamiliar faces, and even certain smells. Sherri would particularly start spiraling anytime she encountered anything related to Latin culture, which is actually just so infuriating the more the story goes on.
Oh, yeah.
Sherri stopped driving and wouldn't eat unless Keith or her sister Sheila made the food, and even then, she had to watch them prepare it for her. She said that her captors drugged her, so she couldn't trust anything that came from outside of her immediate circle. Keith did all he could to protect his wife, including installing security cameras around the couple's home. He pinned blankets over every window and lived in constant anxiety that someone might come back, not just for Sherri, but for their children. Sherri started therapy, which Keith also went with her to twice a week, and Sheila even attended some of these therapy sessions and described watching Sherri curl up into a ball and cry as she worked through one memory after another. Privately, though, Keith was also starting to question some things. At one point, he even confided in Sherri's therapist that sometimes he didn't believe Sherri was telling the full truth about what happened in those 22 days. Sherri's therapist tried to reassure Keith that Sherri's story had never changed, and he pointed out the severity of her injuries, which seemed insane for someone to have inflicted on themselves. But still, Keith wasn't so sure. He admitted that he actually could see Sherri hurting herself like that.
And also to the therapist, yeah, she changed quite a few of these details. Even up until this point, she's changed quite a few, and she will change it so much more. So years earlier, Sherri had shown Keith 2 crescent-shaped scars on her back and told him that an ex-boyfriend named James had cut her with 2 knives. But her childhood friend Jennifer heard a different story about the scars. She said that Sherri told her the scars had come from her father, who had pinned her down and sliced her with an X-Acto knife. Eventually, though, Sherri admitted that she had given herself the scars. Keith also knew that his wife had a history of manipulation, but he also believed that she was more fragile than ever. When Sherri returned, she referred to herself as a different person and even called herself Keith's second wife and said she was incapable of lying after what she'd been through. Keith really didn't know what to believe, but he knew that challenging her version of events and leaving her now would only hurt her more. In a therapy session, the idea for Sherri to write a book to organize her memories came up. She agreed, and she started writing her story, which she titled 22 Days. In the book, she gave her abductors nicknames, and these are nicknames that we're not going to share here. Keith said that writing the book was part of Sherri's healing process, but the emotional toll continued to bleed into every aspect of their lives. Sherri often broke down in front of the kids, which Keith didn't like. Their home, which had once been bright and normal, was now a bunker filled with paranoia and emotional distress. To make matters worse, nobody still really knew exactly what happened during those 22 days. And we have more to get into somehow after one quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
As the temps start rising, I feel that familiar urge to refresh my closet. But I'm not wasting money on pieces I'll only wear once or just for one season. Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards.
I picked up a few summer essentials from Quince, and I am loving them. First off, their 100% European linen button front dress. I actually got it for under $60, and it's become my go-to piece for summer. It's breathable and stylish, and you can wear it from brunch to the beach.
Quince also has luxe swimwear, Italian leather platform sandals, and so much more. The best part? Everything is half the cost of similar luxury brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury without the markup.
I'm also a huge fan of how Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. Plus, they use premium fabrics and finishes. You can really feel the difference in the quality. If you want to elevate your wardrobe without spending a fortune, Quince is really the way to go. We use it, and you should too.
Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/moms for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/moms to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/moms.
Here's something cool. Did you know that your liver has the power to break down over 500 different functions in your body, from producing cholesterol to storing vitamins? But with all that responsibility, it can easily get bogged down. And that's where Dose for Your Liver comes in, to help keep it running smoothly.
Over 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver, often without even realizing it. Dose for Your Liver is a natural, clinically supported solution to help promote liver health and maintain healthy habits.
This formula helps cleanse your liver, aids digestion, and keeps things moving smoothly. Your liver does a lot, flushing out unwanted elements, breaking down what you consume into nutrients, and keeping your digestive and metabolic systems in check. Dose helps support all of that.
With Dose, you can feel the benefits over time: more energy, better digestion, and reduced bloating. Plus, in a clinical trial, Dose lowered liver enzyme levels by 50% in 86% of participants. One shot is like getting 17 shots of turmeric juice. Pretty amazing, right? It's gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and vegan, making it an easy choice to add to your routine. If you're ready to show your liver some love, check out Dose for Your Liver today.
Save 30% on your first month of subscription by going to dosedaily.co/moms or entering moms at checkout. That's dosedaily.co/moms for 30% off your first month subscription. And now back to the episode. So before the break, we broke down the story that Sherri Papini told investigators after she was found beaten, starved, and branded 22 days after she vanished. Investigators were still trying to put together the truth about what really happened as doubts began to grow in the community and even within Sherri's own household. Her husband, Keith, supported her publicly, but in private, he feared that Sherri was being dishonest. In the midst of public scrutiny, Sherri tried to move forward with the help of therapy and even writing a book. But authorities were still digging into exactly what happened in the case of Sherri's alleged abduction and captivity. Even as doubts swirled, though, Keith remained focused on one thing: finding the people who took his wife. In the documentary Perfect Wife, he talks about the ways their entire family had changed. He said their kids were traumatized and his life had been turned upside down. He was determined to help the FBI catch the people who were responsible. Keith even sat down with Sherri and helped her create a sketch of the room where she was being held. He researched tables online until he found one that actually matched the description of this table with a fake marble surface, which is something she referenced. Keith passed along every new detail Sherri shared with him to the FBI. Meanwhile, Sherri continued to be fearful of the police. In March of 2017, she gave another interview, but this time with a forensic interviewer from the FBI. Sherri immediately said she couldn't trust the woman. She was scared, and she was still convinced the police might somehow be involved. Despite the tension, Sherri kept offering up new details, but many times they really just didn't match previous versions of her story. At the end of the interview, Sherri asked a question that surprised everyone. "Did they ever figure out what it says on my back?" she said, referring to the brand on her back. She said she had tried to look at it in photos and thought it might say Exodus, but she couldn't make out the numbers. She said she tried to read a passage in the Bible that she thought it might be related to, but it didn't really make any sense. Exodus is a book in the Bible that's like plagues, different things that like you wouldn't really think. Like I think I said this in the documentary one that we talked about, but it's like Revelation. You'd expect Revelation on somebody's back. Exodus is just not one of the books of the Bible that would make a lick of sense. But a few weeks later, on March 31st, Keith called the FBI with more updates. Sherri had remembered more details about the room she was held in. Now she was saying the walls were half covered with something like beadboard paneling with drywall above it. She said the carpet was orange and shaggy. They drew up new diagrams that included the chaining device that Sherri said was in the closet.
In June of 2017, Keith reported 2 incidents where Sherri had completely shut down. The first time was at a Dick's Sporting Goods in Oregon. They had wandered into the firearms section and Sherri spotted a black Ruger revolver. She pointed it out to Keith and said, "That's the gun they used," and then she just froze. The second incident was during a cosmetic treatment with a plastic surgeon to help repair the burns on her arm. But when she smelled the burned hair from the laser, she shut down again and the treatment had to be stopped. To Keith, these moments were proof that the trauma was real, but to the FBI, they just seemed like more pieces to a puzzle that was not quite fitting together. After all the sketches, all the memories, and all these emotional triggers, they still didn't have any leads. That month, Sherri agreed to help the FBI try to identify her captors, and she looked at a photo array and gave general descriptions of the 2 women. The details were oddly specific. Sherri said the older woman was a few inches taller than her and had what she said were fat fingers, smooth skin, and coffee breath. She said she wore her hair in a braid or a ponytail. The younger woman was shorter, muscular, and had curly hair and wide hips. She wore hoop earrings and had hairy arms.
I feel like she's just trying to be mildly offensive to both
100%.
of these fake women. Yeah.
That's what I was kind of saying before. I'm like, everything is offensive. Like whenever she talks about like the women and whenever you realize some things later on in the story, you're like, wait a minute, like you didn't have to say all that or act all that at all. Sherri did say that both women smelled like laundry detergent and they always appeared clean. Sherri went so far as to find reference photos online to show police images of people with similar skin conditions and examples of the types of masks the women wore. The FBI revised the sketches based on Sherri's new recollection, and Sherri approved them for public release. What followed was not a flood of helpful tips, but instead a flood of calls reporting random Latina women for absolutely nothing.
This is all giving Susan Smith from back in the 90s, the lady who's said that her 2 sons were kidnapped by a black man at a stop sign, and that ended up being, obviously she did it, but it was like a whole thing, and that seems like about as helpful as this is being that Sherri's saying now.
Right. So the FBI did quickly become concerned that the release of these sketches could trigger racial profiling or even much worse.
Within the FBI, some agents were growing more and more uneasy with Sherri's story. And then they found something else. A MySpace blog post titled "Keep Walking" was written by Sherri Graff, and that, again, was Sherri's maiden name. The writer described going up in Shasta Lake and being bullied in high school by a group of Latino girls. One passage read, quote, "I used to come home in tears because I was getting suspended from school all the time for defending myself against the Latinos. The chief problem was that I was drug-free, white, and proud of my blood and heritage. This really irked a group of Latino girls which would constantly rag and attack me," end quote. The writer also bragged about a fight where she broke another girl's nose and split her eyebrow. The writer of the blog closed the post with this disgusting line, quote, "Being white is more than just being aware of my skin. but of standing behind skinheads who were always around in spirit as well and having pride for my country, end quote.
Okay.
The days of MySpace were wild, but I never ran across this. This is insane. So gross. So when investigators asked Sherri about this blog, she said she didn't remember having a MySpace account. But she did admit that she had seen the post before and had even hired an attorney in 2017 to try and get it taken down. Wow, that's tough, Sherri. She claimed that someone else must have written it under her name, but insisted the blog did not reflect her personal views. Okay. Unfortunately for her, the post had a photo of her on it, so she wasn't very convincing. Keith had also seen the post and said that Sherri had denied writing it and claimed it was a cruel joke that someone played on her. But now, in light of the racially charged descriptions of her supposed abductors, the FBI couldn't ignore it. I'd like to hear from that attorney as well.
Yeah.
How come you weren't able to take it down if it wasn't her?
Right, because he couldn't, in good faith, take her money when all he had to do was say log in and delete it.
100%.
Yeah. All right. On October 16th, Keith and Sherri met with the FBI again, and they were shown 2 mugshots and several Facebook photos of possible suspects. Sherri didn't identify anyone, but she did say that one of the women's eyebrows looked kind of like her younger abductors. This wasn't exactly a breakthrough, but Sherri did share more details that day. She said that during her first shower in captivity, she begged the younger woman to let her go, but the older woman passed by and hissed at her. Then the younger woman allegedly told Sherri they were selling her and that the buyer was a cop. Sherri also said that the large SUVs like Suburbans or Tahoes made her physically sick to look at, and she believed the car she was taken in had a rear hatch and was possibly an SUV. During the meeting, Keith shared a photo of a cut on Sherri's foot from the day she was found. It was the same foot she claimed was injured when she attacked one of the captors in the bathroom, but there was just one problem. The wound in the photo didn't match the dramatic story Sherri originally told. Keith then took another look at it, and he realized that the police were right. Something actually didn't really fit about the whole thing. The foot wasn't dripping with blood like Sherri had claimed, and it just didn't really appear to be as serious. Sherri admitted that she did exaggerate the story, but the truth is that she, actually had never seen those injury photos before, and then once she saw them, she really had no choice but to try and backtrack. And this is, of course, not a huge moment in the investigation, but it was still very telling. As time went on, Sherri continued to supposedly remember new details that she would share with the FBI. On March 16th, 2018, almost a year and a half after the supposed kidnapping, Sherri told the FBI that she recalled something important during a therapy session. The burns on her arm, she said, had not come from a branding iron, but instead from heated silverware that her abductors, I guess had heated up like a knife or something and then placed it against her skin. But what was even crazier is that Sherri told the FBI she believed she has the exact same kind of silverware at her house.
Wow.
Yeah, so Sherri said that she was out of town on a trip and had poor cell reception, like while she's telling them about this silverware thing. She says, I'm calling from out of town. I'm on a trip. I don't have good cell reception, but as soon as I get home, I'm going to send you a photo of the matching utensil. Yeah, so a few days later, she texted the FBI a photo of a spoon and wrote, I don't recall seeing anything other than the shine, but now that we look closer, you can see the first spot she touched it to my skin when I jerked away, and that it appears to be drag marks? ? The second when I flinched, and the deep mark when she held my arm and pressed it in there and held it there. So just like the rest of Sherri's story, this is somehow very vague and oddly specific at the exact same time.
Unreal. Literally. So for years, Sherri's story captivated the public and consumed the investigators, but the case remained unsolved. That is until a crucial scientific lead quietly cracked everything wide open. On September 26, 2019, investigators took a new approach. They submitted the unknown male DNA originally recovered from Sherri's underwear for a familiar DNA search, hoping to find someone genetically related to the person who left the sample behind. In March of 2020, the results were in. A man was flagged as a possible relative of the DNA contributor, and this man had 2 sons. One of the man's sons was James, who just happened to be Sherri's ex-fiancé. At this point, the pieces started to fall into place and things started to add up. Sherri and James had been close since they were teenagers, and at one point they had gotten engaged, but they split up in 2006 and hadn't spoken for years. Until 2015. Nobody actually knew that Sherri had quietly reconnected with James. So the FBI began investigating James and found some odd overlaps. He had briefly been connected to a property owned by Sherri's parents, and he and Sherri had access to a joint AOL email account. They also found a Facebook photo from James's brother that showed a coffee table that looked suspiciously like the one Sherri described laying on when she was branded. In the summer of 2020, agents went to James's home and collected items from his trash can, including a bottle of Honest Honey green tea. The items were sent for testing, and the results were definitive. The DNA on the bottle matched the unknown male DNA found on Sherri's underwear. The story Sherri had been telling for years about two masked women being chained up in a closet and supposedly being sold to a police officer, all of it was unraveled, and the FBI was more than ready to confront the truth.
On August 10th, 2020, nearly 4 years after Sherri's high-profile disappearance, the FBI sat down with James and the case was finally about to be cracked wide open. From the start, James didn't hesitate to admit that he helped Sherri run away. According to him, it was all Sherri's idea. There were never any masked abductors, no chains, and no trafficking ring, just a woman who wanted out of her life and enlisted an old flame to help her do it. James said that Sherri contacted him with an urgent request. She claimed that her husband Keith was physically and sexually abusing her, and the police were doing nothing to help her. She claimed that she had filed reports, but nobody believed her, and she was just desperate to disappear. James believed Sherri was in real danger, so he agreed to help and said he genuinely thought he was just being a good friend and possibly even saving Sherri's life. He said they first reconnected in 2015 after he found a box of Sherri's old belongings, including photos and mementos, and he sent this box to Sherri's parents' house. Shortly after that, Sherri got in touch with him, and one thing led to another, and eventually Sherri proposed this escape plan. They started talking through prepaid phones. Eventually, Sherri sent James a care package while he was recovering from a hospital stay, and inside was a piece of paper with the location that she wanted to be picked up. James followed the instructions. He drove to Reading, stopped at the specified location, and picked Sherri up on the side of the road. There were, as we said, no masks, no weapons, no SUV, and definitely no Latina women. When authorities asked James if there were any other women involved, James laughed it off and said no, he didn't even know any Latinas.
James told police that on October 31st, 2016, he asked a friend to rent a car for him, but never explained why. It was a dark-colored Dodge Challenger, and by November 2nd, James was on his way to Reading in it. James stopped by Trader Joe's and Starbucks to pass the time while he waited for Sherri's instructions. Eventually, Sherri texted him the pickup location, and when James pulled up to the road, she approached the car and climbed into the back seat without saying a word. James drove nearly 600 miles to Costa Mesa, only stopping for a few quick things along the way while Sherri stayed quiet and slept for most of the trip. Occasionally, she would mention her kids and her concern for them. Once they got to James's house, Sherri didn't leave, not even once. She asked James to buy her some basic clothes like sweatpants, socks, and t-shirts from stores like Target, TJ Maxx, or Ross. During the day, James went to work while Sherri stayed inside. She chose to sleep in a room with limited window exposure, and James believed she did that on purpose to isolate herself further. The house had 2 bedrooms, and James slept on the couch. He said there was no sort of romantic reunion. It was just Sherri quietly existing in the man's house, completely cut off from the rest of the world. And then the most striking details came to light. The closet in the room where Sherri stayed had a pole running through it, just like the one she described to the FBI in her story. Investigators confirmed that James's closet matched the unique design of the one Sherri claimed to have been chained up inside of. James also said that Sherri requested he board up the windows a few days after she got there. She said that she wanted the room to be dark. Every detail of the house, including the bathroom and the layout, matched the house that Sherri described in her abduction narrative.
James said that Sherri started to deliberately restrict her food and would only eat small amounts because he believed she was intentionally trying to lose weight. One day he came home from work and saw that Sherri had cut her own hair. He said he didn't know what she did it with, but it happened early in her stay and things started to spiral into something much darker from there. According to James, all of Sherri's injuries, the bruises, the burns, the fractured nose, all of them were self-inflicted. He said she started hurting herself shortly before she planned to leave and even asked for his help in creating some of the injuries, though he was adamant that he never directly put his hands on her. He said she would hit herself, and James would sometimes help in ways that felt more detached, such as holding out a hockey stick while Sherri ran face first into it, which is what fractured her nose. Melissa,
Unreal.
I can't imagine. It just seems to go against all logic. Like, most people can't do that to themselves. Like, you're not supposed to
No.
be able to do that. You're not supposed to be able to run face first into something and, like, without flinching.
Yeah.
That's
Without
not
slowing down.
right.
Yeah.
I don't even have words to describe it.
Disturbing.
Yes, very disturbing. James also said that he would use the same hockey stick to apply pressure to Sherri's back or push her into a wall at her request. And on one occasion, she asked him to hit a hockey puck off of her leg, so he complied. James said he didn't know why Sherri wanted to hurt herself like this, but it all seemed to ramp up as the end of her stay approached. At some point, Sherri told James to purchase a wood-burning tool from Hobby Lobby and very specifically said she wanted a small plug-in tool with interchangeable metal letters. James bought the item in cash and took it home, where Sherri declared that James was going to use it to brand her. She lifted her shirt and told him what phrase to brand, and he complied. James said Sherri never flinched or complained, but he was nervous about doing it wrong or hurting her, and he even bought her burn cream to help afterward. James said the branding took place within the first week of Sherri's arrival. When it was done, Sherri told James to throw the tool away, and so he did. Investigators would later end up finding Sherri's Pinterest account, and they saw that she had a secret board labeled gift ideas, and that board had pictures of different wood-burning tools on it.
Did she ask an attorney to take that down because it wasn't actually her Pinterest board? Goodness. So during her time at James's house, Sherri avoided contact with the outside world. James didn't have a TV, but Sherri had a phone and followed the news of her disappearance, so she was very aware of how her abduction was being portrayed. At one point, Sherri developed a rash on her arms, and James bought multiple creams to help, but nothing worked. James wondered if he and Sherri might reconnect romantically, but he insisted that nothing sexual happened between them during those 22 days. Just before Thanksgiving, Sherri told James she missed her kids and wanted to go home. And James admitted that he was bummed about her decision and hoped they would rekindle their relationship, but Sherri had made up her mind. She told James to help her stage her return. She said she needed zip ties, a chain, and other items to make it look like she had been held captive. James bought some of the supplies at Ace Hardware, and other items came from his personal stash at home. James asked a friend to rent a car again. This time it was a white Mitsubishi Outlander, and then they drove over 7 hours back to Reading. If I was his friend, I'd be like, rent your own dang car. Why are you asking me? That's so wild to me. So before leaving, Sherri bagged and discarded anything that could identify her, including items she used at James's house. As they got closer, James dropped her off along a remote road near an orchard. There were no houses or lights nearby. Sherri had a black prepaid smartphone, but she had tossed it out the window on their drive. She also had a bag with her that contained the restraints she would later be found in. Sherri used the restraints to bind her own wrists and ankles before attempting to flag down help on the side of the highway.
After he dropped Sherri off, James drove straight to San Pedro and attended Thanksgiving lunch at his aunt's house, and then he returned the rental car the next day. While Sherri was hiding out with James, his cousin's spouse, and his mother knew that she was there, but James had explained that Sherri was fleeing an abusive marriage. The cousin, who lived across the street, saw Sherri twice, once through a window and once when the cousin entered James's house unexpectedly and Sherri ran and hid, actually both times that she was spotted. James's cousin also shared that Sherri had asked James to punch her in the face, but James refused to do it. Instead, Sherri hurt herself by slamming her head into the bathtub and bathroom floor, all in an effort to make the story of her abduction seem more believable. By the time James confessed his role in Sherri's disappearance, investigators had a mountain of evidence already to back up his claims. Though he admitted to helping Sherri run away, he insisted that he did it to help her and believed he was doing the right thing. It wasn't until he saw the news and learned that Sherri staged an abduction, complete with masked captors and chains, that James realized how serious the situation had become. He told the FBI he didn't know he could get in trouble for his involvement, but he decided that if authorities ever did come to him, he wouldn't lie. He never came forward on his own, but he also never tried to cover anything up either. He also said he didn't know there were any monetary rewards involved in Sherri's disappearance until after she had already left his house. James said that he had not heard from Sherri since the day he dropped her off. The investigators believed everything James told them. He was able to describe specific injuries and events that had not been released to the public, and his story did match the phone records, travel logs, and even the mileage on those rental cars. Records showed that he and Sherri were in contact 29 times between December of 2015 and March of 2016, and that contact continued during the time she was missing.
On August 13th, 2020, investigators sat down with Sherri for another interview. Keith was there, kind of like he always was, and at this time, things were going pretty well for the family. He was working from home due to the COVID outbreak, which made Sherri feel more at ease, though she still struggled with anxiety, especially because, as she claimed, face masks were a trigger for her, but Keith said they were making progress. However, the FBI warned Sherri that lying to federal agents is a crime and that it was time to come clean and tell the truth. Sherri did not heed this warning, and instead she continued to stick to her lies. Investigators showed her photos of James's house in hopes that it would rattle Sherri, but she just said that it looked pretty effing similar to where she was held captive, but she didn't admit to actually having been to that specific place. Once the agents told her that they were showing her pictures of the house where she'd stayed for 22 days, she reacted as though she was stunned. They asked if she'd like to have Keith step outside while they questioned her further. Instead, Sherri asked them for privacy so she could talk to Keith alone. And Keith, when they were sitting together, urges her to tell the truth and admits that she's not making any sense, even to him, and he was getting scared. He said, quote, "So you need to tell me what's going on immediately." Sherri, though, clung to her story and claimed the police were just effing with him and that she didn't want the woman who took her to get in trouble because, according to her, that woman had let her go. Sherri Papini is a saint. Because imagine being able to being able to forgive somebody for keeping you from your family for 22 days. So when the FBI agents came back in, they told Sherri they weren't going to find any mysterious female captor because she didn't exist. At that point, the agents confronted her with the most damning evidence they had. The male DNA found in her underwear was a match to James. They told her then that they knew her entire abduction story was a lie. And Sherri broke down in tears, as you would assume she would, but she said there's no way it could have been James because he loves her.
What is going on here?
I know. She denies the accusations, but when she's shown phone records that proved otherwise, she was again reminded that lying to federal agents is a crime in itself. Eventually, Keith left the room, and Sherri partially admitted to what happened. She acknowledged that she had spoken to James a little and admitted to talking to other men during work trips. But her cooperation really ended there. She said she wanted a lawyer, preferably the one she got on MySpace, and she refused to continue speaking. Outside the interview room, an FBI agent warned Keith that Sherri might try and hurt herself. Keith expected Sherri to get arrested, but she wasn't taken into custody that day.
After that bombshell interview, Keith was shaken to his core, and he couldn't even stand to be around Sherri. He asked her to leave their home, and she went to stay with his Aunt Pam for a little while, but she still did not drop the act. Sherri continued to insist that the FBI was wrong, and none of what they told Keith was true. Eventually, Keith did let her come back home. He said he just felt so torn, and he wondered, what if, against all odds, Sherri was telling the truth? He didn't want to just abandon her if she truly went through something terrible. That part of it, like this back and forth that Keith is having, like throughout this whole thing, honestly, it just breaks my heart because I feel like I am the same way. Like you always want to see, you don't want to believe like the worst thing possible in front of you. Like, like it would be so hard to just like to think like, what if I did abandon my spouse and it came out that like, all of this was like a crazy, thing. I just felt so bad for him, like having to sit there and be like, I don't know, feel so torn like that. Cause I feel like I understand like what that would feel like, to feel like on one hand, this doesn't make sense. And the FBI literally has proof that you're lying. But on the other hand, like you're my wife, the mother of my babies, like the person I thought I had like a whole life with, like there's no way that like you could have set all this up as a hoax. Like how would you ever get
Right.
mentally to believe that, you know?
I feel like until that person actually told you, it would be impossible to fully let that go, at least at this point. Like, he's just finding this stuff out, you know?
Yeah. So Sherri was able to twist the narrative just enough to convince Keith that James may have been involved, but that she had still been kidnapped. Like, yes, maybe it wasn't these two Latina women that I said, but I was still kidnapped. You know, she's still sticking with that part of the story. So life slowly started to drift back to normal, and the investigation kind of went silent for a little while. It's worth noting that Keith had mentioned James's name very early in the investigation when he told Detective Wallace that James allegedly had abused Sherri in the past. Some of Keith's friends had even been surveilling James's house themselves because they thought something was off, but they had never confronted James directly. As investigators started to conclude that the kidnapping was all a hoax, the attention shifted toward the money trail. In the wake of Sherri's rescue, quote unquote, a GoFundMe had raised nearly $50,000 to support the family. And on December 6, 2016, Keith had deposited $31,818.13 from that GoFundMe into his personal bank account. That same day, he wrote a check for $1,160.06, and that check was made out to Sherri. It was learned that over $8,000 of the donations was used to pay off Keith's own credit cards, and Sherri used just over $3,000 to pay hers off. The rest of the money went to various personal and household expenses, not to the search effort as the donors had believed. In addition to the GoFundMe, Sherri also received over $30,000 in compensation from the California Victim Compensation Board between 2017 and 2021. This money covered things like ambulance bills, therapy, and even new blinds for the house.
Oh, wow.
Sherri had to sign a paper under penalty of perjury affirming that her account of being abducted at gunpoint and held for 22 days was true, correct, and complete. But as we all know, it wasn't. So collecting that money was a big fat crime.
On March 3rd, 2022, more than 5 years after Sherri's hoax, the FBI finally made their move. Agents showed up early that morning and began surveillance in Sherri's neighborhood at 7 a.m., waiting for her to leave the house. It wasn't until around 2:30 that she finally stepped out. Sherri drove to the Reading Music School where her kids had a piano lesson. While she was there, agents staged a ruse and told her that someone had hit her car to lure her outside. When Sherri stepped outside the building, they told her she was under arrest. Sherri handed her phone and belongings to her young son and told him to call Keith, but it was actually the kid's piano teacher who used Sherri's phone to make that call. She got Keith on the line and bluntly said, quote, "The FBI got Sherri. You need to come get the kids," end quote. Emphasis mine. I don't know what the emphasis was there, but that's in my head, that's how I read it. So Sherri was charged with 2 federal crimes, one for mail fraud for taking thousands of dollars in victim compensation, and the other for making false statements to federal investigators. Both charges carry severe penalties. Mail fraud is punishable by up to 20 years in prison and fines reaching up to $250,000, and making false statements can mean up to 5 years in prison and similar fines. Keith was completely blindsided. He later said that Sherri had wanted to take a plea deal that would come with 6 months of house arrest and an ankle monitor, which Sherri said was really no big deal since she didn't like leaving the house anyway. Keith really just could not wrap his brain around it. She insisted she was innocent for years, so why would she now want to take a plea deal? Then Keith was confronted with the truth by Sherri's own attorney, who told him that Sherri had confessed to everything and admitted that her whole abduction was a staged and planned hoax from the start. She admitted to following the coverage of her story from a burner phone while she was hiding out at James's house.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm.
On April 12th, 2022, Sherri pleaded guilty to both charges against her. As part of her sentence, she was ordered to serve 18 months in federal prison with the potential for a 54-day sentence reduction if she demonstrated good behavior after serving 1 year. Sherri was also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $309,686.33 to the victims of her fraud, which included the California Victims Compensation Board, the U.S. Social Security Administration, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI. At the sentencing hearing, Sherri addressed the court with a carefully worded apology that basically amounted to something along the lines of, "Yeah, I totally lied and screwed over a bunch of people, but I'm super sorry. Thanks to everyone who supported me while I was being, a complete dumpster fire. Ready to move on, heal, not fake any more kidnappings, and never lie again." That's what she said. She's incapable of lying. So, I don't think a lot of people took her apology too seriously. In the years following Sherri's fabricated abduction, those close to her have speculated on a wide range of theories to explain why in the heck she orchestrated such a bizarre, intricate, and damaging lie. Sergeant Wallace believed Sherri thought her life was slipping out of control and she was desperate to reclaim some type of power. Her sister Sheila chalked it up to just craving attention. Keith, who lived through the chaos firsthand, suspected that Sherri borrowed heavily from real-life cases and stories such as that of Elizabeth Smart, Tara Smith, and even the movie Gone Girl. Keith filed for a divorce in April of 2022, and he was granted full custody of the children. Sherri was released from federal prison in September of 2023 after serving just under 11 months. She was sent to a halfway house in Sacramento, but the saga didn't end there. As we said earlier, this year, 2025, a docuseries called Sherri Papini, Caught in the Lie, aired on Investigation Discovery, and we are doing this docuseries on Patreon and for our subscribers this week, so this is a really, really good one. Even though we've just kind of have covered this whole story, the documentary has Sherri speaking for the first time publicly, and it really is a really good one to watch. So yeah, check that out for sure, and check out our discussion on it. You'll be able to find that in the feed this week. And as of today, Keith and Sherri, if you were wondering where they are at, they are divorced and they are entangled in a custody battle. Sherri is desperately trying to reclaim more time with their kids. Of course, you understand why Keith is kind of like, I want to protect the kids because I don't know what you're capable of. So,
and look what you've already done.
Exactly. So yeah, absolutely a wild and crazy story. We talked about this in one of the recordings we did of the bonus episodes. About what we think about why Sherri did this. I genuinely believe that she is just the type of person who needs attention, and she did this purely for attention and the reason I say that is because even after the fact, after she returned, she still used this fake experience to get sympathy for herself. You know, over and over again, she would have these fake mental breakdowns and these things that would trigger her that would lead to her husband or her family members, coming and, crowding around her and providing
Comforting her.
Right, exactly. And, oh, poor Sherri, she's been through this horrible thing, let's all focus on Sherri and feel bad for Sherri. And it was just a way for her to get continued attention for something really big. And it was kind of like a thing like, well, don't you believe me? And like, the people like her husband was like, well, I don't, but I want to. And like, I feel bad if you're not lying. And so just to put your family and a husband and kids through that, to put your kids through not knowing where their mom is for 3 weeks and for what? Literally for what? For attention?
Yeah.
Because there was no other motive. It's not like she did it for money or for,
No, I feel like she wanted attention from everybody, and that's what ended up happening. And then she got attention from the world, and now she's lying. I mean, it's wild, the thing she says now, like where, I don't know. You hear from her attorney in this documentary, you hear from her psychiatrist, you hear from all these people who very much tend to like lean on her side, not necessarily saying that everything she's saying is true, but like they very much got this is very heavily skewed to make her look better.
Right.
I don't know that it worked at all.
No,
Not for me.
No, and I do feel like there was some, even the people who were allegedly being open and honest and speaking, to tell the true story. There were some things I could tell were being held back and that were not said in the documentary. And like you said, it was framed in a way to favor Sherri, but I don't know that it had that effect.
It was giving the Casey Anthony when she did that Peacock thing. I never watched it, but I remember seeing previews from it, and it just made me so mad. But it felt very much like that, where it's like, well, if you knew the real story, you wouldn't feel this way. And you're like, why are you mad at me? You're the one that lied, not me. Yeah. I'm just watching this.
Right, exactly.
So anyway,
Thank you guys so much for listening to these two-part episodes. I know it's a lot. I think we probably won't have hopefully not another super long one for a little while. We'll try not to anyway. But yeah, thank you guys so much for checking it out, and we will be back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.